Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the webinar, Reproductive Coercion and Survivors' Lived Experience in a Post-Dobbs World. This program is sponsored by the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and is part 3 in the Reproductive Rights Initiative and Conversation series exploring the complex and rapidly changing legal landscape of reproductive rights in the US. The section of Civil Rights and Social Justice is actively planning additional programming on a variety of issues. So please visit americanbar.org/CRSJ for updates on these programs. Today, we will be talking about reproductive coercion and partner violence. Earlier this summer, the Domestic Violence Hotline, in collaboration with If, When, How, issued a report about survivors and their experiences in post-Dobbs landscape. I'm so honored to be here to discuss that with my presenters. I am Carla George, Program Director of the Family Law Project at Sanctuary for Families for the Bronx Family Justice Center. I'm also a member of the Reproductive Rights and Justice Committee, ABA section of the Civil Rights and Social Justice and ABA Commission on Sexual and Domestic Violence. I'd like to give my presenters time to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Sarah Ainsworth. I'm the Senior Legal and Policy Director at If, When, How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. If, When, How is an organization that works to ensure that every person has the power and the resources they need to determine if, when, and how to have families in safety and in security and to live lives free of state violence. I came to my work as a former representative of low-income survivors of intimate partner violence as a legal aid lawyer, a VOCA grantee and a VAWA grantee as well. And so I have long experience in working directly with survivors of intimate partner violence and trying to help them navigate the legal system. And I'm looking forward today to talking about how that intersects with reproductive rights and the access to abortion, birth control, and other services that everybody deserves and needs, regardless of what they're experiencing in their life. And I will pass to Miriam.
Thanks, Sarah. My name is Miriam Durrani. I'm the Vice President of Policy at the National Domestic Violence Hotline. We answer the call to shift power back to survivors. So we are a 24/7 service hotline available via phone, text, and chat for survivors, their loved ones, their families, anyone else trying to support someone in their life experiencing relationship abuse. We are also available on our website at thehotline.org. And I would encourage you, if you've not taken a look, to take a look at our website and look at all of our resources. All of our resources are also available for everyone to access on their own. I'm really excited for today's discussion. I think it's such a critical part of the survivor experience that I think is finally getting more attention, and it's really exciting to be able to discuss the results of this survey. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Miriam. I'm so excited to be here with you. So let's jump right into it. The study that you conducted, please share with us what prompted it and how it was conducted.
Sure. So from the National Domestic Violence Hotline, we track metrics about what we're experiencing on the lines, and that's actually how we develop our policy agenda and really prioritize where our advocacy centers and what sorts of resources we're continually updating. After Dobbs, we experienced pretty much a 99% increase in our contact volume, citing reproductive coercion or abuse as part of their experience of violence. So we were already in some discussion with If, When, How about how to address all of the new reproductive coercion and abuse survivors that were coming to our lines, making sure that they were getting really holistic services, really holistic resources. So we decided to partner together on this survey. So between October and December of 2023, the hotline conducted a survey to learn about survivor experiences with reproductive coercion and abuse. And just to clarify for everyone listening, when we reference reproductive coercion in this survey, we reference that as the use of violence, sexual assault, manipulation, birth control, sabotage, threats, and any other means by an intimate partner to force or coerce pregnancy or pregnancy outcomes. So when a violent intimate partner coerces their partner into becoming pregnant, they increase their means of control over that partner. Pregnancy and subsequent childbirth also heightens the abuse survivor's risk of injury or death at the hands of their intimate partner. And then we also have found adolescents and young adults are especially vulnerable to this and really likely to experience reproductive coercion. So this is the first national survey that we know of that really captured survivors' experiences with this. And in the report, all of the responses were anonymous and confidential. We collect no identifying information other than what people choose to report. So you'll actually see that a lot of survivors do choose to share their demographic information, their age, and all of that. So 3,431 respondents completed the survey. And we actually have a lot more survivors who open the survey, who try to take it and don't complete it, but we only analyze who completed the survey. So this report contains really powerful information from survivors who voluntarily gave insight into their experiences. And the thing that I would just caution everybody about who's taking a look at the survey or even reviewing this webinar is that these stories are really heavy. There's a lot of trauma. They intersect with so many different survivors' experiences and life stories. So please take care. Please take breaks. It's a lot, even if you're a lawyer or a non-lawyer. You need to take care of yourself. So please just keep that in mind today and as you read the report and as you navigate these in your own legal world. So turning to the specific demographics that we experienced or that we saw in the survey, 74% of respondents identified as a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, or gender-based violence. 17% of those that did not explicitly identify as a survivor also indicated they experienced sexual coercion through the survey. So I think that's just a really important note for how you interact with clients, how you navigate survivors' experiences, is that survivors may be experiencing all these sorts of types of abuse in their life, but may not even personally identify as a survivor. And as you can see, the predominant identification of individuals that responded were 65% white, 15% Latinx, 15% Black, 5% Asian, 4% Native American or Hawaiian, 2% Arab or Middle Eastern, 1% Native Hawaiian, 1% Pacific Islander, and 7% who did not choose to share their ethnicity. And then, of course, we have the ages. The predominant group that responded at 31% were 34 to 45-year-olds, 25% were 25 to 33, and then we have some folks who are older and younger. And then again, predominantly responded by female and female identified individuals at 86%, 8% male, and of course 6% who are non-binary, transgender, two-spirit. And then the predominant respondents were 64% heterosexual, with 6% identifying as asexual, 15% bisexual, and 1% gay. And I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you for that information, Miriam. That was great. So may I ask, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned the 1973 Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade, which affirmed the constitutional right to have an abortion. So what does that mean for people, and how does that correlate with criminalization of abortion?
Yeah, thank you, Carla. So what I'd like to do now is take people back a little bit before that decision and then respond to that question, because I think the context helps a lot. One of the things that we all knew that was true, even before the Supreme Court undermined and eliminated the right to choose an abortion that was protected by the federal Constitution, was that reproductive health care access was not guaranteed equally, and people were still denied access to care from the time that Roe was decided until the present day. And there were a lot of reasons for that. And one of them is that the abortion right itself was constructed as a right to make a decision, but not a right to the resources a person needs to actually effectuate that decision. And in addition, states were allowed significant legal leeway to restrict access to abortion. So what we saw in place in the years leading up to Dobbs were what we call state-generated barriers to reproductive health care. We use that term in contrast to a term we use a lot in the world of intimate partner violence, which is batter-generated barriers to safety, right? So the person that is the abuser has a lot of power, exercises a lot of power and control to limit a person's ability to get what they need, including health care. Unfortunately, these were state-generated barriers to care and made it that much harder for people, especially those experiencing intimate partner violence, to get the care that they needed. So I won't walk through them all in a lot of detail because we have a pretty time-limited presentation today. And as you probably know, as attorneys, we could walk through, we could do a webinar on each one of these barriers. But the most well-known probably is the Hyde Amendment, which restricts federal funding for abortion care, including in the Medicaid program. And though while some states immediately sought to, and in the years since more have added Medicaid coverage, some by a decision of their legislature, some by court order, there are still many states, and there were still many states and still remain many states where people who are receiving Medicaid health insurance cannot access abortion care that's covered by that insurance. Other health insurance barriers are in place. We see increasing, as you all know, in this current environment, increasing rhetoric used to demonize people who have immigrated to the United States. That has long been true and resulted early on in restrictions that eliminated the ability of people who whose immigration status maybe was not covered for healthcare access in getting access to abortion. But it's not just what the law did, it's also what the state-stoked rhetoric that is anti-immigrant in nature scares people from getting access to healthcare. We also have many states, the majority in fact, who require parental involvement in a young person's decision to get an abortion. And while we know that most young people do in fact involve a supportive parent in that decision or another supportive adult, legal requirements that they do so end up harming those who are most likely in danger of abuse, harassment, or threats from their own parents and from their community. And so forced parental involvement laws restrict young people's access and put a barrier in place that for many is unfortunately insurmountable. Incarceration and immigration detention, those are places that are not healthy for people. They're not healthy for people at all, not just because of the environment itself, but because the access to healthcare is so limited and restricted. And many jails and detention centers actually prohibit abortion access, sometimes unconstitutionally and sometimes with legal authority. And unfortunately for people in those situations, that has always been an access barrier, even when their right was allegedly constitutionally protected. We also see people experiencing continuously, even in states that have now protected abortion more thoroughly since Dobbs, TRAP laws. That stands for, as many of you know, Targeted Regulation of Abortion Providers. These are laws that are designed to make it harder for people who are healthcare providers to actually provide abortion care, imposing strict and overburdensome licensing requirements, inspection requirements, making it hard for them to rent a space to have a clinic, making them have to report in ways that eliminate privacy protections for them and potentially for their patients. All of those things are designed to make it harder to get access to abortion care by eliminating provision of abortion care. On this slide, you'll also see a reference to forced provider scripts, ultrasounds, and waiting periods. And what we're talking about there are state laws that force providers to read certain words to patients, words that are designed to scare patients and give them misinformation about their healthcare risks if they receive abortion care. Ultrasounds, again, when they are unnecessary, are still required and forced upon patients, which is an added expense for healthcare that is unnecessary, and again, just creates time burdens that make it harder for people to get the care they need when they need it. Waiting periods are designed to do precisely that. Under the fiction that people who are seeking abortion care don't really know what they want and are undecided and don't know how to make a decision on their own or where to turn, waiting periods simply force them to wait longer. And what that results in is people who have to travel long distances to get abortion care, having to travel long distances more than once. You can imagine how this impacts survivors of intimate partner violence who often can't even leave their home without the abuser knowing, may not have access to a car, face the kind of sabotage that abusers are very skilled at doing in preventing them from accessing medical appointments. So waiting periods impose an enormous burden on people. There is also a continued effort of states to divert money that is designated for helping people get out of poverty through the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. Because states receive that money in the form of a block grant, they have a lot more power to distribute it as they would like. And in states that oppose abortion, there has been an increasing use of those dollars rather than putting them in people's pockets when they actually are in need. They're putting it into the hands of anti-abortion organizations known as crisis pregnancy centers that don't actually provide medical care, but are specifically designed to try to divert people from getting abortion care. Finally, even before the Dobbs decision came down and the fears of criminalization arose, we still saw certain politically motivated prosecutions of people who experienced abortion or a pregnancy loss for which they were blamed by law enforcement. I'm going to move to the next slide. So that was then, and this is now. A lot of the same stuff, but let's see, I want to make sure I'm in the right slide for y'all. Okay, there we go. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I want to make sure that I'm in the right one. Okay, there we go. So criminalization. From 2000 to 2020, we know because If When How conducted peer-reviewed research that at least 61 people across the United States were investigated or arrested for allegedly ending their own pregnancy or for helping someone else do so. Those cases do not include the wide variety of cases for which people were also investigated, prosecuted, and even jailed for pregnancy outcomes that were unintentional, stillbirths, miscarriages, or using criminalized drugs during pregnancy, even if the birth outcome was healthy and positive. Those cases essentially show us that it doesn't necessarily matter what the law says. If somebody views abortion as a stigmatized, potentially criminal activity, prosecutors can find other laws to use against people. The kind of prosecutions we saw in those years looked like people being prosecuted for manslaughter, sometimes homicide, neglect of a child, meaning the child was deemed to be the fetus or an embryo that a pregnant person was carrying. Also crimes like concealing birth or abuse of a corpse would be used against somebody for what they did after they experienced a pregnancy loss. And those crimes were pulled into play to go after people who may have taken abortion pills to end their own pregnancy or taken some other action to do so. Okay, now I'm on the right slide. Forgive me for that earlier. So what we see now is that we've got even more, an explosion, in fact, of state-generated barriers to reproductive health care because states now have the authority to totally outlaw abortion care in their states under the Dobbs decision. So now 14 states are enforcing their total bans on abortion care. As of this recording, I want to be super clear. This is an evolving situation. It is legal chaos. Just in the last 3 weeks, Georgia went from actually lifting its ban, a court order that lifted its ban, and people were about to start providing abortion care, and then its Supreme Court stayed that, and then we don't know what's going to be coming of that Supreme Court decision. So it's completely volatile. By the time you see this, that number might have changed. But as of now, we have people, millions of people, many of whom are survivors of intimate partner violence, living in states that have either entirely banned abortion or are enforcing gestational bans that make it extremely difficult to access abortion care in a timely manner in their state. those laws do not actually criminalize the person who has an abortion. In almost every instance, they explicitly exempt that person from criminalization. But as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter what the abortion law says if all these other laws in the criminal code can be utilized to go after somebody for their pregnancy outcome. Even people who did not actually have an abortion or attempt to have an abortion, just in the last year alone, there have been hundreds of people who have been criminalized for a pregnancy loss. One example was well known on the internet because it went viral. A woman in Georgia who had had a miscarriage at home was arrested. She was charged with the crime of abuse of a corpse. And then ultimately, a grand jury decided not to indict her after significant public outcry. But that law is still on the books in Ohio, and that law was already used against some of the people we represented, If, When, How, and others in the last few years for exactly the same experience, a pregnancy loss or self-managed abortion in a context of being unable to access abortion care. And in all of those cases, the person, other than the one that was public, the people were survivors of intimate partner violence who were right in the middle of experiencing intense physical and emotional and power and control actions from their abuser. I'm going to pass back to Miriam now.
So Miriam, let me ask, what would you say people don't understand about the reproductive coercion? How can you educate us?
Thanks, Carla. I think that there are lots of misconceptions about reproductive abuse and reproductive coercion and domestic violence generally. So I think it's important to remember that reproductive coercion is a broader pattern of power and control, right? The abusive partner's goal is often to trap the survivor and make all of the decisions about the survivor's reproductive life and reproductive autonomy. I think the other thing that's really nuanced and insidious is a lot of survivors may not even recognize it as abuse. I think those are the most harrowing parts of our survey when someone responds and says, I did this survey and I didn't even realize that what I was experiencing was coercion. I thought it was my partner making relationship decisions or caring behavior, and I think it's that reproductive violence or reproductive coercion are not just always about pregnancy. It's about controlling a survivor's entire reproductive health. So that doesn't mean it's just physical. It's manipulation, it's threats, it's coercion, it's control. And it's frankly often overlooked in legal and healthcare settings. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about the lawyers who are hopefully viewing this content today or later on, but also by healthcare providers. And, it's a completely intersectional experience that I think even domestic violence advocates are now integrating into their service provision, their safety planning. It's a really, really nuanced experience. And I can say, as a former LAB grantee who started out doing some litigation work, I saw every single one of these intersections with my clients who are maybe just getting a protective order, maybe just dealing with child custody. All of these experiences came up. So I think these survey results are really illustrative, starting with our sexually coercive behavior questions. A significant majority of the respondents, 63% of all respondents, said that their current or former partner pressured or forced them into having sex or other sexual activity when they didn't want to. And for those that explicitly identified as survivors, that increased to 76%. 39% said that their current or former partner threatened them if they said no to sex or other sexual activity. So again, now we have these really harrowing stories. I'm going to go ahead and read these out loud, but please take care as you listen to these. A former partner told me that if I did not have sex with him, he'd call a group of his friends and all 6 of them would rape me. He made a joke mocking me for having a small pocket knife to protect myself. I had to allow him to have sex I didn't want with me, figuring bearing it would be better than fighting sex. Another survivor shared, I was young, he was 5 years older, he was controlling. If you love me, you'll do this. He'd drink and get aggressive. We'd argue, fight, get physical. Then he'd force me to have breakup sex. If I didn't have breakup sex, he'd take my birth control from my purse or hide it. Often he'd kick me out of the house if I didn't have sex with him. Put out or get out were his exact words. So I think the stories are the most harrowing and also incredible part of this survey because they offer such incredible insight to how survivors experience this violence. Next slide, please. So next, we turn to the birth control, STI, and STD and pregnancy prevention part of the survey. 23% said their current or former partner knowingly exposed them to an STI or STD. A survivor said, when I found out I was pregnant with our daughter, my ex-husband informed me he had an STD. When I became upset, he told me he had not told me about it before then. He threatened to throw me down the stairs in our home to make me have a miscarriage. 37% said their current or former partner refused to or prevented them from using condoms, diaphragms, or other STI, STD prevention methods. So another survivor reported he would do a cycle of refusing to wear condoms or letting me use sperm killing gel to prevent pregnancy, would sneakily remove the condom he'd put on or finish inside me without my knowledge or permission. He swore he didn't know if he came, wasn't sure if he came, did it come at all, etc. Next slide, please. So 20% said that their current or former partner prevented them from using birth control altogether. So that's pills, patches, rings, IUDs. And then we have these really harrowing examples of how partners actually interfered with the usage of these pregnancy prevention, birth control, STI, STD prevention methods. So 24% said they destroyed it, 21% said they hid it, 20% said they tampered with it, 32% said they withheld it. Survivors shared, I wanted an IUD after several other methods of birth control. My ex-abuser was extremely against me getting an IUD. After I got an IUD against his wishes, there was an extended period of heightened abuse and neglect. He voiced his belief that my choices for my own body were unfair to him because they were against his wishes and prevented me from having children. And then the bottom story on the page is when I was 16 years old, I became involved with a controlling partner. He removed the condom behind my back multiple times. Since I was young, I could not tell at those times. I ended up pregnant. I was not given the option of abortion and was coerced by my partner and his family to keep the baby. I'm an intelligent and strong two-spirit woman. Because of this man, the promising plans I had for myself in the future were taken away from me. So again, we see the really complicated and nuanced experiences that survivors face. And I'll turn it over to Sarah to finish us out with the rest of the results.
Thank you. And just urging everybody to take a deep breath. I think, as Miriam said, those stories are harrowing. They're extremely dispiriting to all of us who've worked so long in this field to try to end the use of threats and coercion in intimate partner relationships. And again, though, they're really important for us to recognize and to see. So turning to the next slide on birth control, STI, STD, and pregnancy prevention. 7% of the respondents to the survey said that their current or former partner prevented them from using medication abortion to have an abortion. And I think many of you know already, because there's been so much attention to it, that the distinction between a medication abortion and a procedural abortion is that the medication abortion is done with pills. They are the two safe and effective abortion pills that are used together in combination in the United States, mifepristone and misoprostol. As you are probably all aware, mifepristone and its approval by the FDA was the subject of a United States Supreme Court argument back in the spring. And ultimately, the people who are challenging the approval were found not to have standing. But nonetheless, there unfortunately is in that US Supreme Court decision a bit of a roadmap for people who want to bring the next challenge and find a way to have standing. So the ability to access medication abortion remains contested. But what we found is when people wanted to have access to that, their intimate partner providers, not just the state and not just the courts, was involved in trying to prevent them from accessing it. 23% said that their intimate partner destroyed their medication abortion and the pills that they needed to end a pregnancy. 20% hid it, 13% tampered with it, and 37% withheld it. Some of the things that they shared with the survey were that their current or former partner prevented them from using medication abortion by using emotional manipulation. One person said, they begged me not to have an abortion or else he might commit suicide. Another said that their intimate partner lit the medication on fire. Another said that they locked the person up so they couldn't go get their abortion. And finally, someone shared that their partner threatened mine and my family's lives if I got an abortion. Some more of these stories that people shared with us. These have to do with being pressured to get pregnant, or to end a pregnancy, or to not end a pregnancy. So 23% of respondents said that their current or former partner pressured them into becoming pregnant. A person shared that their partner, quote, got me pregnant deliberately against my will after I made it clear I didn't want kids. I believed he did it to keep me trapped and tied to him. An aside, when we do this presentation in a 2-hour version, we share with folks that research has shown that people who are denied the abortion that they need at the time that they need it and are in abusive relationships are significantly more likely to still be in that relationship 2 years later, to still be experiencing physical violence, and to be raising the children that they had alone without any support from that partner. 13% of respondents in our survey also said that their current or former partner pressured or forced them to terminate a pregnancy. So it is not just keeping people from their right to terminate a pregnancy, but also forcing them to terminate a pregnancy, all of which is a part of reproductive coercion and reproductive violence. One person shared, I had a boyfriend who did not force me to get pregnant, but it happened, even with a condom. And they forced me to have an abortion and then flipped and called me the devil and blamed me for everything. 9% of the respondents said that their current or former partner used or threatened violence if they wanted to or were trying to terminate a pregnancy. A person shared, quote, he asked me what I would do if I was pregnant. And before I answered, he said he would kill me if I had an abortion. At the time, I didn't take him seriously, but as I got to know him better, I realized he probably meant it. Luckily, I had good friends and a counselor who helped me see the relationship was unhealthy, and I got out before it was too late. I have never heard of reproductive abuse before seeing this survey on Instagram. I feel validated that this is a thing. Thank you. Finally, 13% of respondents said that their current or former partner used or threatened violence while they were pregnant with the intention of ending the pregnancy. All of that conduct that we've just been able to capture is not new. But what is newer since Dobbs is the ability of partners to use the legal system and its treatment of abortion to threaten criminalization, meaning prosecution, arrest, investigation of their partners by law enforcement. So this is a growing issue, and this is the first survey that any of us are aware of where survivors have been asked this particular question. And so we asked people whether or not they had ever had their partner threatened to report them to the police or to other legal authority just because they were considering having an abortion, and 5% of the respondents to this survey said that they had. We asked them to share with us whether their current or former partner had threatened to take them to court or sue them if they had had an abortion or just because they wanted an abortion. 5% of people shared that their partner had done that. And finally, 12% of our respondents indicated that their current or former partner used a previous abortion against them in some way. So sharing a story that somebody shared with us. During my relationship with my abuser, he would force me to have unprotected sex so I could have more children to further my financial and economic abuse, making it harder for me to leave. During the beginning of our relationship, I had 2 abortions. The first he financed, and the second he refused. I had to come up with the money myself, whichever way I could, and later he accused me, saying that wasn't his baby, and that's why I had an abortion, to cover up. He used that as an excuse to mentally, verbally, emotionally, and at times physically abuse me throughout our relationship. During our relationship, he also knowingly transferred an STD to me to further punish me. And back to you, Carla.
Thank you. I'm just so astonished and shocked at some of those stories. But thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to ask you, when you say people are being criminalized, can you share what those prosecutions look like?
I can, and thank you, Carla, and thank you for, yeah, the commiseration of how difficult this is. What these have looked like in the past couple of years have been people who there's a couple of different circumstances that I'll describe to you. So sometimes there are people who live in a state that has either banned abortion or has heavily restricted it. And they're not certain how they can get access to and their own pregnancy or get to a clinic. For people in abusive relationships, getting out of the state to get to a clinic in another state, even though that is a protected constitutional right, is sometimes impossible and also a huge risk, right, that the abuser might become aware. So more and more people are ordering abortion pills, either online or they're getting them from other state providers that are protected by shield laws. And what we have seen is that people who may need some follow-up care or aren't certain that they actually completed their abortion and want to go to a doctor to get it confirmed face the risk of being reported by a healthcare provider, even though the federal HIPAA law that protects all of our medical privacy, and this administration has made clear, does not allow the sharing of that information with law enforcement. And that is not a subject for mandated reporting, but nonetheless, we've seen that happen time and time again. And when that happens, law enforcement has shown up at hospitals, interrogated people who are in the middle of getting a blood transfusion, interrogated people who've just come out of a follow-up surgery. They get arrested either from the hospital and taken to the hospital. A couple of instances, people were denied immediate medical care during that arrest and were still bleeding in interrogation rooms. This can look like people going to jail for some period of time, high bail being set because of the nature of the crimes they're charged with. Those crimes range from concealing birth, abuse of a corpse, to homicide, manslaughter, and other, crimes that carry enormous jail sentences and penalties. While that criminalization case is going on, as you all know as lawyers, there's other impacts on people's life that are as serious. And the most particular one we see time and again is the family policing system getting involved and stepping in to take children away from somebody based on these accusations alone, or based on the fact that they're in jail and there's no other parent to take care of the children. And so you see people ultimately losing custody of their children to the state. And all of those things are things that we at If When How are striving to help people avoid by providing the free legal services of Repro Legal Helpline. We put up on the slide here that information, and we urge you to share it widely. Go ahead, Carla.
I was going to ask you, so thank you for jumping on that. If you can share any legal resources in addition for people suffering through intimate partner violence and or have questions about their reproductive rights.
Thank you so much. So as I mentioned, our helpline is free. It is available to everyone in every state who has questions about their reproductive lives. They will get legal services from trained attorneys when they call the helpline. We provide 24-hour response to emergencies. Emergencies lately, unfortunately, have looked more and more like people needing to invoke their rights in the hospital to not speak to the police. We've been able to help people do that in real time on the helpline more than twice in just the last week. So this is a common thing, and we're really glad people are increasingly having access to the helpline. And in addition, the helpline will also provide services around if Child Protective Services has asked someone questions about their children and access to abortion or other care. We provide direct support to young people who need to access abortion care by a judicial bypass proceeding in court. And we'll answer questions and help people assess their legal risk, particularly around self-managed abortion as well. So in addition to connecting you directly to direct legal support, people can get advice from this helpline as well. The other thing that we have a service for is defense funding. So our Repro Legal Defense Fund provides support for anyone facing legal consequences for abortion, miscarriage, stillbirth, or other pregnancy outcomes. We pay attorneys. We bail people out of jail. We ensure that they can actually access getting out of jail, because if they need home monitoring, that costs money for people, and we will help pay for that. And we provide holistic wraparound care and support through the Defense Fund. So we will also help people access therapy, medical care, pay for the other things they need. If it's as simple as just a phone to check in with somebody's probation officer, if it's a phone to access your children if they're in the custody of Child Protective Services. And we make sure that a person has every kind of legal defense that they need, including family defense representation, criminal defense representation, and referrals to people when they need domestic violence protection. So just in the last few weeks, a volunteer attorney obtained a protection order for a client who is facing criminalization because of their abortion. So we make sure that they get all the services that they need to actually get free, stay free, keep their children, and get the health care that they need.
Thank you so much for that. Miriam, maybe if I can turn to you and ask, what are the less obvious and underreported impacts of the post-Dobbs landscape?
I think it's thinking about survivors who are the most impacted and the ways that they're impacted. I think in this world, we're often talking about survivors who maybe have access to healthcare, who have access to a job, who are able-bodied, but we are not always talking about survivors who are living at intersectional identities, who maybe don't have a job, who don't have things, even if they do have a job, don't have access to things like paid leave, don't have access to safe and stable housing, don't have access to economic resources. We know that beyond just reproductive coercion and abuse, leaving a relationship or even making the steps to leave a relationship or heal from a violent relationship is incredibly costly. It can mean doctor's appointments, it can mean counseling, it can mean legal services, it can mean taking time off to relocate, it can mean actually relocating. If you have children or a family, it means managing all of their needs, it means transportation. So there's this completely holistic approach to what survivors need. They need options, they have unique needs. But I think the thing that we at the hotline know that survivors are really experts in their own safety. I think creating the opportunities for survivors to tell you what they need is really valuable because they know what they need to stay safe. They know how you can help them. So giving them the opportunity to really share those experiences and seeing how you can help. And that means you don't have to do it all yourself. There's lots of ways to collaborate with the community and provide those resources. So, it's really wraparound. But I think that's the unique part of being a lawyer and lawyering on these topics is you really do provide wraparound services. That's kind of the beauty of lawyering.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I may just add, in addition to the holistic approach, myself being a direct service provider, I feel like it's very important to have that trauma-informed lawyering, where we come from a point of understanding and not recognizing being able to recognize our biases. And knowing that we are at different levels, or at least the survivors look at us at different levels. And so just taking back and coming to them on a scale or on a platform where they're comfortable. And that can look like many different things. But I think offering those holistic services that you discussed, Miriam, is one way to approach it in a trauma-informed way when lawyering, and having all of the organizations, not just your own, how you and Sarah came together and did this great survey that brought back all of this information. And so that's how I think attorneys in just some of the ways can help and just educate themselves by watching this webinar, and maybe having you and Miriam, Sarah, do some trainings so we can further educate ourselves. But that leads me to ask the both of you, Why are reproductive rights autonomy critical to survivor safety?
I'm happy to start, Miriam, and then pass to you. Does that sound good? Okay. Thank you, Carla. In order to live free of abuse and to to live the life a person wants to live, reproductive autonomy is critical. And reproductive autonomy means freedom from state interference, state violence, and state coercion, right? That would coerce your decisions, prevent you from accessing the services that you need, and punish you for the decisions that you make. And that very same analysis applies to the context of intimate partner violence. In order to be free to make autonomous decisions, to live a life where a person is not controlled by another, they can't be forced to have a child when they're not ready to have one. They can't be forced to have an abortion when they're pregnant and want to have a child. They can't be forced to go through with a pregnancy when they have medical reasons that they need not to, or psychological reasons that they need not to. And there are many survivors that, if they were in a different relationship, might want to have a pregnancy and go forward with the pregnancy, but they know that the outcome of this pregnancy means having to be permanently tied to an abusive partner because you've had a child together. And then even if you can use the legal system to navigate away from that person, it's incredibly expensive. Often abusers use the legal system to continue further their control and abuse, as you well know, Carla, and I know too from doing that work, that it is incredibly damaging to go through a divorce with an abusive partner and fight for child custody. It is an incredibly hard process, and it doesn't end when the divorce is final. So I think that is why on sort of the level of just living a life free of control by other people, it's absolutely necessary. I'll pass back to Miriam.
Thanks, Sarah. I won't reiterate a lot of Sarah's points because they're spot on, but I would just press on about reproductive rights and autonomy in particular, because that affects the survivor's ability to make decisions about their own body. So it's very hard to live a life, a safe life, a life free from violence without being able to make those decisions on your own. When an abusive partner exerts control over a survivor's reproductive choices, it limits that survivor's ability to actually leave a relationship or even take any steps they want to take towards independence. So by protecting reproductive autonomy, all that we're asking is that you give survivors the choices to make their own choices that affect their safety, their health, their well-being. But if we take away those choices, survivors don't even have those options to figure out what they need to stay safe. So autonomy is just really foundational to regain control over your future, over your life, and to really break free of a cycle of abuse.
Thank you so much for those answers. And I just wanted to elaborate on what Sarah discussed as far as the litigation abuse. And I have said to my clients, your body, your life, your decision. And the reason why I say those things is because Sarah was spot on by saying litigation abuse, and it lasts for a long time. And just specifically in my own work, I've had cases, just one case, city petition, go on for 5 years. I've had clients, the children have aged out. So that means that you're still in court fighting when kids are 16, 17, all the way into their 18. So it doesn't stop, after pregnancy. And I've seen the abuse get worse because, when a woman wants to leave a relationship, that's the most dangerous time. And as they're doing that and they're leaving, they're going into shelter there, and then they start that custody battle because they take the children with them, or even if they don't, they file that custody petition, and then it gets even worse. And here in New York, unfortunately, we do not have, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but there is no parental kidnapping law here. So a parent could, just take a baby from the other parent, and they have to fight that through litigation. And that could be months or a year or so before you see your child. So I want people to understand that when you hear those stories that Miriam and Sarah went through, when you hear that the litigation abuse, it just doesn't stop. I go back to what I'm saying: their body, their life, their decision. And so, just to sum it up, where are we with respect to the abortion bans throughout the US right now?
So we have a real range of state responses. As I mentioned earlier, it's an incredibly volatile situation. There are many bans still being litigated in court at this time. But at this present moment, there are 14 states that have totally banned abortion. There are additional states that have passed bans that affect gestational age. So some are 15 weeks, some are 18 weeks, and some are 20 weeks. And then conversely, we have states that have taken stronger actions than we have ever seen before. So I myself practice and live in Seattle, Washington, and been a long time gender rights advocate in this state. And I've never seen until post-Dobbs the kind of supportive legislative response, governor's response, attorney general's response to protecting and ensuring access to abortion rights ever in my career until now. So states like Washington have made it against the law to criminalize somebody for their pregnancy outcomes. They have enacted shield laws that protect providers. And in many states, including Washington state, those shield laws also protect providers of transgender affirming care, which has been, banned for people under 18 in many states, and their parents threatened with criminalization and family policing actions. And so if they leave the state to get that kind of care, for example, in my state, the shield law protects their medical privacy and ensures that their records can't be subpoenaed or brought to another state. And that's the same thing for abortion providers and for people who would help somebody access abortion. So you have essentially this patchwork that's complicated, and what it results in is a flow of people from the states that are not protective of abortion into the states where people are in order to get the care they need, which puts a burden on the healthcare system in that state, of course, and it makes it harder for survivors in particular because they have to actually leave their own state to get the care that they need. Or you see people accessing pills and self-managing their care in the state where they live, which again carries criminalization risk for them, even though it should not, because there's a misuse of the criminal legal system that was never intended to be used against people for ending their own pregnancy. So that's where we are at this present moment. And of course, we are facing potentially really different outcomes depending on what happens in November. On one side, we've had people who threaten to use an old federal law called the Comstock Act to potentially criminalize any mailing, shipping of abortion pills, implements, et cetera, across state lines with the goal of banning and stopping abortion nationwide. On the other side, you see a push to say we can pass a law that overrides these state bans and protects everybody's access to abortion care. And all during the national conversation, you don't see a lot of attention paid to intimate partner violence and its impact. I'm not saying that there's none. There have been articles, there's been notice of how these state bans actually empower abusive people to abuse their partners. And I'm hoping for more attention to that as we talk about where bans are proliferating, what people need to do to actually access the care that they need. I'm hoping people can pay more attention to how when states restrict, they enable abuse.
Thank you. Miriam, do you have any last thoughts?
I would just encourage everyone on this call to integrate gender-based violence into their legal advocacy, right? I mean, we're talking about integrating reproductive coercion and abuse, but there are so many clients that may come to you with a housing need or maybe a wills and trust needs. And I think integrating some aspect of safety planning into intake and to that overall beginning a relationship building with a client could really help on so many different levels to ensure that client is safe. You know, if you're helping them get out of a terrible housing situation, maybe you're also getting them resources that support the violence they're experiencing and get them into new, you know, safe, supportive housing. I think it's asking those right questions and also that trust building, but also really building that collaboration with advocates, with healthcare providers, with other community partners. There are so many people out in the world who want to help you, who want to support you. I think as a lawyer, sometimes you are in this unique kind of siloed place by yourself. So I think it's knowing that it's not just you. If you need a place to start, I'd recommend going to the hotline.org. We have some very basic, straightforward tools on safety planning. There's tons and tons of resources on there. I'd encourage you to take a deep dive into the actual survey itself. So if you go to the very top and click download resources, at the very bottom are all of our surveys, and we have surveys on a couple different topics. But I think the last thing I'd make a pitch for is we're all advocates at heart. You know, we can advocate for protections that safeguard survivors' autonomy with both intimate partner violence, with both reproductive autonomy, and all around. You know, I really saw in my world as a litigator the deficits in the legal system and what it could provide for survivors. And then I moved to a career in public policy, trying to change that. And it's a lot harder than you would think. But I think as a lawyer, you are so naturally going to be successful in the advocacy that you do. So I really encourage you to take that on. And I really hope that every single person who listens to this call figures out a way that you want to take action in your own communities, maybe with your own legislators, maybe with your own policies. I think there's so much that we can do, but really to prevent and end intimate partner violence, it's going to take all of us thinking about all these different ways that we could be successful.
And Sarah, what would your call to action be for this audience?
Thank you, Carla, for that question. I absolutely second everything Miriam had to say about the amazing tool that being a lawyer gives you to be an advocate for people. And I would add that where I have found my advocacy with a client to be most meaningful and successful for them long term is when I also partnered with advocates in the community, when I partnered with other care providers. So I think knowing that, recognizing that part of a holistic practice is building a community of care around the person who's experiencing, whether it's a denial of abortion care and they're not experiencing intimate partner violence, they still need community support, whether they are experiencing criminalization or the host of all of these things we've been talking about in the context of intimate partner violence, or as Miriam said, they come to you for a will, they come to you for some housing support, all of that. If you can build, you bring the skills that you have to the table, people who have background in safety planning or expertise in counseling survivors of intimate partner violence, all of the people in your community doing that work are your team. And I would really encourage you to build those relationships locally while you're learning about what's happening nationally, and also providing your support as an ABA member to the work that the ABA is trying to do to ensure that we have just laws enforced justly and equitably.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could talk about this all day and talk about what we could do, but we have to end here. So I thank you for watching and engaging with our program. Thank you to our participants, Miriam and Sarah. You both are doing such great and critical work, and we thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to share your expertise. I am just in awe of both of you. The series will continue throughout the year and address other significant components of reproductive rights. The section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provides free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope this helps in your work. And again, if you can, please consider joining and becoming active in the ABA. You may do so at americanbar.org/CRSJ. Best of luck in your work, and thank you for your time with us today.